Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is Kid Native Bloody Elbow, joined by a special guest, a special treat, Sherdog Radio Network's Jack Encarnacio. Jack, did I get your
What's up?
name right? I get
Nailed
everybody's
it.
name wrong.
You nailed it
Nailed it.
so hard,
Awesome.
it's not even funny.
People say this is Pro-Am web broadcasting, but I say this is Am Pro web broadcasting. We are here to talk about are they monumental events of this week? Chael Sonnen failed a drug test, announced his retirement. He's off the UFC 175 card. Presumably his future with FS1 announcing Fox Sports is set. But I mean, what's your first reaction to this whole thing? What's the biggest story of the week? First takeaways, initial blush, and then we'll get into the whole Chael Sonnen story.
I think it's an interesting end to this career, if it is indeed an end. I'm starting to get very skeptical about whether Chael isn't just taking the time he needs to get his levels back to where they need to be, get his body back used to producing testosterone, prior to his body being told that a synthetic source would be producing it for him and therefore wreaking havoc with his endocrine system. But it's been an interesting twist in the road, because here's a guy who got popped for the things you're supposed to take to come off of these drugs. And
Which are
as
banned
opposed, of course, no question, they're on the banned substances list, and they're on the banned substances list because you really wouldn't take them for any other reason unless you were using testosterone or using anabolics or using some kind of banned substance. And they
But
do have.
what about his family? He wants to have a family, Jack.
Yeah, well, all the power to him, and that's certainly a position that no one's going to be in opposition to, right? You know, that's like that's something that nobody is ever going to argue against. Good luck arguing against that. So all the power to him, and if this is part of that plan, so be it. It's a complicated thing that synthetic testosterone does to one's system, and to reverse the effects of that, and to hold off the side effects like gynecomastia and some of the other issues that come along with, basically.
Gynecomastia, aka bitch tits, for
I let
those.
you say it. I let
Yes,
you
by all
say it.
means. Jack is
Um,
a professional.
that's
I'm an
correct.
AM pro. So
That's correct. That's correct. No, I kid. So it's really been a Chael has taken us through quite an education on this entire issue. He's been the face of it in a way where, you know, with Chael Sonnen, there's a lot of cachet in digging into everything he says, and there seems to be a high interest in amongst the folks that cover him in trying to figure out and detect any leaps in judgment, leaps in logic, any hidden truths, half truths in what he says. I mean, he's the most dissected word for word fighter I can think of in mixed martial arts.
because
And
he's by far and away the best master of spin this sport has seen. His
oh,
wrestling hypes might be a bit stale. He's stolen routines from superstar Billy Graham and others, but his real mastery is the double talk. I mean, he's been caught in lie after lie after lie. Things like that wasn't me on the voicemail or what. Remember that one
yeah,
where
yeah, well,
yeah,
right.
and
That guy has a Hispanic accent on
yes,
the
that
Lance
guy has a
Armstrong
Hispanic
comment. That
accent.
Lance Armstrong
He
gave himself cancer, which
yes.
is nice.
he claimed that under oath before the California State Athletic Commission, he claimed that he had personal permission from Keith Kaiser, who said he had never spoken to Chael before that day. So, and he's a convicted felon for fraud, a federal
Yep.
offense, and yet
He's a wink winker.
he's a wink winker, and yet his spin. I assume you watched the Dana White and Chael on FS1 this week.
Yes.
Dana's spin. Dana's a very good spin doctor. Other than Chael, the best in the sport, maybe the best of the sports scene in North America. But on that show, Dana was not happy. He was not comfortable. He got crankier as the segment went on, and I
Looked
haven't
like he
heard
just rolled
people.
out of bed.
He did. I haven't heard people repeating his talking points. However, as soon as Chael went on there, with frankly a load of specious nonsense and non sequiturs, things like "I'm not in competition." Well, yes, you are in competition. You're contracted to fight in a matter of weeks,
Mhm.
and these are banned substances, and part of the licensing process is you agree to submit to random testing. So you're not out of competition, son. You're
Yeah.
in competition,
Yeah, very
and
much so.
so, these things have been repeated. His line that these were legal substances, that was genius. It's completely irrelevant. It's a banned substance. You
Right.
agreed not to take banned substances as part of your fighting license,
Yeah,
so
he
it's really
conflates
immaterial.
he plays a lot around a lot with the definition of illegal. When he says illegal, he's talking about the things on the federal schedule of drugs that the feds will kick in the door to grab. You know what I mean? As opposed to some kind
Exactly.
of, some kind of cheesy testosterone booster that you see advertised in the middle of the night on an infomercial, which of course aren't schedule whatever drugs and they're not illegal to possess. And you won't get indicted for having them. And that sure is illegal, and if you don't want to call the banned substances list a law, which it really isn't, I suppose it's a regulation to be precise, by a body that, at least in terms of USADA, has kind of a quasi-governmental function and has received government funding in the past. But all of that is to say that indeed, he does use words like illegal very carefully, and that's why it's rewarding and almost called for to so closely dissect every word Chael Sonnen says, because he plays the game on the other end, very much so. And he's a master at it. I mean, certainly I think his public is ill-equipped for the most part to deal with the razzle dazzle. I mean,
Exactly.
he's got like a rope-a-dope verbally, that he pulls on folks, and it's, hey, I don't know, maybe it makes me a bad person, but it's fantastically entertaining. It's great fun, and I can't get enough of it. And
Absolutely.
one of
Absolutely.
the
As a
things I think,
student of media and propaganda, I mean, I've worked for Senator Mark Warner, Senator John Kerry. I was active in the Howard Dean campaign. I've worked for a lot of politicians. I used to work down the hall from Governor Ann Richards. I mean, I know spin when I hear it, and I know it. I've done advance for President Bill Clinton briefly, but did it. And Chael Sonnen has the talent to do a professional political career. Honestly, as somebody who's not a supporter of his brand of politics and given his criminal record, etc., and proclivity for untruths, I'm glad his political career was nipped in the bud, because this could have been a dangerous man. He's handsome, he's articulate, and he's a great guy to deal with. As far as interacting with fighters, I've had some of the most pleasant interactions with Chael. I like Chael Sonnen. I'm going to be critical of him, but the deal with Chael is, unlike a lot of fighters, he understands that when you're making a fair criticism, and when he thinks you're being unfair, he'll let you know.
Mhm.
But he's perfectly fine with me calling a convicted felon, because we both know he is.
Yeah,
Some fighters would not be so keen on that.
right.
So it is remarkable, and the MMA audience is not equipped to parse his bullshit. Just not.
And even when it is parsed, they don't really. I don't really know if they care. I mean, because this is a cult of personality sport where you decide consciously or subconsciously on who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, and you receive information on the bad guys through the prism of, I knew he was a bad guy, here's the proof, and you receive information on good guys through the prism of, well, I can see where he's coming from if indeed something specious or untoward comes out about him and his background. Such a dramatic, and there's reasons for it. Contrast between how Dan Henderson's TRTUs and Chael Sonnen's TRTUs have been covered, talked about, dissected, questioned, have been the subject of widespread skepticism. All of this is to say that I think Chael Sonnen, we first became aware of this type of use at UFC 117 in the Anderson Silva fight, in which he took 4.5 rounds from the greatest fighter of all time, blew everyone's expectations away, and matched the talk. I think it's important to remember that if Chael Sonnen did that masterful verbal campaign to build interest in that fight, and indeed build interest in Anderson Silva, who, despite being an otherworldly athlete, had yet to really move the needle in terms of pay-per-view numbers, Chael Sonnen did that. He brought it out of Anderson Silva. He made Anderson Silva a personality as opposed to just a fighter, someone whom you wanted to see react to things. And so in that way, Chael Sonnen did it that night, and he backed up the talk, which is what really puts the fuel in the fire. You can talk, but if you get blown out of the water once or twice, people stop caring about the talk. When you create that sense that you have it in you somewhere to actually back up the talk and win a fight and beat Anderson Silva, that's where you have a good several-year run and make some serious money, and that's what Chael Sonnen did.
Yeah, and look to Phil Davis for somebody who began experimenting with smack talk and then pretty much made a fool of himself when he was challenging John Jones, and then gets beat and doesn't even get a title shot.
Mm-hmm.
It gets beat pretty handily. Who beat Phil Davis? I can't even remember.
Well, he lost to Anthony Johnson rather
Anthony
soundly.
Rumble
Yeah.
Johnson. That's the fight that he spent the whole pre-fight build up to that, trash talking the champion John Jones, and then comes out and had really nothing for Rumble Johnson, and he looked bad. And the thing with Chael was, it was that 117 fight was such a great fight because Anderson Silva was seen. I mean, this was a guy who was toying with opponents. You know, Talis
Oh yeah.
Latis, Patrick Cote, Demian Maia. He was mocking them. I mean, that was the knock on Anderson Silva. Why would I want to watch this guy? He's not even taking his job seriously. They can't find anybody who can even challenge him. Chael was not seen as somebody who could challenge him. Although, you know, when you look back stylistically, wrestlers were going to be Anderson Silva's weakness, as Chris Weidman proved. But, you know, people thought at the time, well, Dan Henderson couldn't beat him, so, you know, Chael's no Dan Henderson. And yet, that fight, it was like watching a pitcher shut down the 1927 Yankees or something for a no-hitter. You know, I mean, he had to win by decision. You knew he wasn't going to finish in Anderson Silva, so he had to pitch a perfect game, and he got so close. And, you know, fifth round, I had to miss part of that fight because of a wife's cousin's wedding or something, and I walked in to the room where my friends were watching the pay-per-view in the middle of the fifth round, and I had gotten to my phone. Oh my God, you know, Chael is doing this, and I walk in just in time for him to basically lay into a triangle.
Yeah.
And do you remember the Matt Lindland interview? And I've been looking for this and looking for this. I cannot track it down, but I swear I remember Matt Lindland calling him second place Sonnen in the aftermath of this and
He
saying,
said
you
that a
know,
couple of times. He was very direct in his criticism of his longtime training partner and friend and manager until the aforementioned Keith Kaiser dust up and the who told who what. All of that happened, and it was like UFC 117 was where we first learned that Chael Sonnen was doing testosterone and where he first created the glimpse that he's worth investing in as a potential UFC champion. That this isn't just a slate of brilliant, artful trash talk that he's bringing to the table for a one-off event. Indeed, this rematch, because of the way the fight played out, would almost hit 1 million buys, would break Las Vegas gate records for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And I'm sorry, but what gets lost in the discussion in the cult of personality of Chael Sonnen and picking apart his spin, he used testosterone and it made him an incredible fighter. It made his
it definitely
takedowns
contributed.
more powerful. It made his double legs more effective. He was dozing through opponents. He was big brothering Brian Stan, who went on to, I remember interviewing him on Sherdog Radio about it, and he pretty much copped to being totally disillusioned because, of course, that fight took place in Texas where there was nothing even close to testing. And, he felt kind of an unreasonable amount of strength in the cage from Chael Sonnen. For a man his size at his weight class, it seemed insurmountable. It didn't seem to be a question of, takedown defense that I need to brush up. It seemed to be a question of this is just too much force to resist. And that's why he does it. He did it because it helped him win fights, catapulted him to the very top of the UFC, the top tier of guys in terms of moneymakers, stars, got the John Jones title shot off a loss. I mean, if Chael Sonnen's story is supposed to be a cautionary tale about why not to do this, I'm not seeing it. It's the precise opposite. It's the type of reward that the sport, the way it's set up, will allow you if you bend the rules and are masterful about how to talk your way out of it when you get caught. And the guy is set up at Fox Sports. He's got a job that just about every single fighter who calls it a career would die for. You sit in the chair, you put a suit on, and you analyze the fights. What a great way to transition gracefully out of the sport before you get brain damage.
There's
And
a lot of guys who would like that gig that were good announcers. Jen Pulver would have loved a gig like that. Frank Trigg would have loved a gig like that. Frank Mir had a gig like that and lost it. There's a long line of fighters who are none of them are quite as articulate as Chael, but plenty of perfectly competent, charismatic, on-camera personalities that would love to have that gig. And here's a guy, convicted felon, two-time steroid drug test failure. Never won a championship, always going to be that second place Sonnen is going to be out there. That was the knock on him in his Olympic various attempts to make the Olympic team as well, and that's what Lennon was referring to. And so he's this fascinating figure, and the UFC peaked at UFC 100 in the popular consciousness and as a business entity, right? With Brock Lesnar, GSP, it was the culmination of the tough era. Chael was kind of the last afterburner we've seen since then. Ronda Rousey is working on being one now, and maybe John Jones, but they haven't quite caught fire to the extent Chael did. However, it was always intertwined from the very beginning, or very near the beginning, because of this drug test failure. So Chael Sonnen and TRT are like this double helix wrapped around each other. You can't separate them. And his felony conviction happened right around the same time. he pled guilty to real estate fraud or money laundering, excuse me. And so to me, it's like, was that a net gain for the UFC, or has he done more harm to the UFC than good? I mean, have
He's
fans?
done no harm. He's done
You
no
think
discernible harm. He's done nothing but made them millions of dollars.
so? You don't think that the association of the UFC
Nope.
with steroids and drugs, that this doesn't hurt the entity at all?
It
Oh, a
doesn't.
deeply dark, cynical take, Jack. I love
Yes,
you.
I
I love
know.
you, brother. It's
I'm sorry to be that guy, but I'm coming from the heart on it. I see no evidence. I
you,
see no evidence that the UFC has been harmed. I mean, there have been so many freaking steroid test failures and so many deep dive takeout pieces, ESPN.com, you name it. And it just people don't consider the UFC a mainstream enough sport to care that much about whether its fighters are on drugs. And if their fighters make for good sound bites and consistent, interesting interviews and consistently entertaining and interesting fights, that's going to win the day 9 times out of 10. I mean, it's
But
just
don't you think that like the UFC was at a point where it was knocking on the door of the mainstream, especially
yeah, I think
2009? It definitely
yeah,
was. Does it help make that not happen? I mean, we thought maybe the Fox deal would knock the doors down. Dana White was talking, oh, we get on FX, we're gonna have 3 million people a week watching The Ultimate Fighter. They got a fraction of that. They've been booted off of
yeah.
FX. I
I
mean,
think if it was going to happen, it would have already happened. There's been enough scandal with very, very tip-top name guys. I mean, just this year alone, with the Vitor Vanderlei Chael thing, and the only real discernible effect in the UFC's business is the week of the fight, come July 5th, Chael Sonnen won't be out there on his bullhorn bringing people across the line to make that impulse buy, which is
but
one of his
don't you
true
think the fact
talents.
that you had a card that's anchored by Chris Weidman and Lyoto Machida, they originally wanted Chris Weidman and Vitor Belfort. They actually wanted that in May, but they want to have a stacked card for July 4th weekend. Chris Weidman, millions of people have paid to watch him on pay-per-view because of Anderson Silva. They've paid that he is the guy that beat Anderson Silva. Both times a little fishy. There's a lot of Anderson Silva fans still clinging to the first time Anderson was joking around. Maybe that was a
Yeah.
fix. Maybe Anderson. And the second time, oh, that was a freak accident. Weidman was just lucky to be there when Silva broke his
That's
leg.
because Anderson's still a bigger star than Chris despite losing to him,
Yes,
just like BJ Penn's still a bigger star than Frankie Edgar despite losing to him twice.
exactly. And Edgar is never going to bridge that gap. Chris Weidman maybe still has a
Yeah.
chance. But with opponents like Lyoto Machida, who's I'd say an accepted product.
Yeah.
Casual fans say, "Oh yeah, Machida, I know that guy, the karate guy, the Machida era, the whole bit." But he's not exactly a barn burner. He's known for decisions and subtlety, and people get frustrated with him. But I think he's a credible enough opponent. They would rather have had Vitor Belfort, and then they've got Ronda Rousey as the co-main, and then the ace in the hole was going to be Chael first versus Vanderlei. Those are both names fans know,
Yeah.
casual fans know.
Great
And then
grudge
it was
match.
yeah, and then it was going to be Chael versus Vitor. Now they don't have any of that. So when people are saying, "Hey, who's fighting?" and they say, "Oh, Chris Weidman." Now who's that? Oh yeah, he's the guy that beat Anderson. I remember him. He's fighting. Who's he fighting? Oh, Lyoto Machida. Yeah, yeah, okay, cool. That sounds good. Who else is fighting? Oh, Ronda Rousey's fighting. There, some people are excited about that. Some people, the jury's out on that. And then that's it. That's all they got. I mean, I think that. Don't you think that's going to cost them some pay-per-view buys come UFC
Yeah.
175? Like,
Yeah,
how
that's what I
many do you
said.
think that costs though? Like,
Um, that's really hard because I think Chael's real value, if it would have been Vitor, if it was Vanderlei, that would have been perceived as the main event come fight night. That would be the fight where there's an issue, a tangible issue that people want to see resolved, and that's always the most powerful dynamic in convincing someone to pay to see a fight. What is the question I'm going to see answered? I'm not just going to see someone defend a title here. I'm not just going to get an idea of if this guy's as good as we think he is. That'll do you about 300,000 buys, as a general proposition. But will this guy be able to back up what he says? What's going to happen when these two guys who have come this close to fighting actually start swinging at each other? That's the real money dynamic. And yeah, Chael was the only guy on the card that brought that to the table. Plus, as I said, he does those go-home interviews the week of the show, which are second to none. He takes over press conferences, enchants the entire press, and they just fill they fill their Twitter feeds with every word he says, and it goes on and on. And it's all justifiably so. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just the gift that Chael Sonnen has. Understands his audience, understands what they want to hear, what they don't expect to hear, and then delivers it. So yeah, that's going to hurt them. Substantially, I don't know. I think you're underplaying Ronda a little bit. I mean, besides John Jones and maybe Cain Velasquez, though certainly Cain has looked incredibly soft on certain pay-per-views, as is John Jones, by the way. I mean, the first Gustafsson fight did 315,000 buys, which is incredibly low. There were mitigating
Ronda's
circumstances
most
there.
recent pay-per-view was not a surprising disappointment because she'd fought fairly recently,
Yeah.
but it was not a strong pay-per-view performance.
Yeah. Yeah, so all that said, the UFC is going to take a hit when it comes to the fighters, the very limited, valuable slate of fighters who can actually make you want to buy a pay-per-view. And those, they're increasingly precious few in the current market conditions. But will it hurt the UFC in some greater way? That no. In fact, Chael Sonnen turned the entire narrative around in
What
24
about
hours.
karma, man? What about karma?
Yeah, sorry.
Don't bad people,
I'm
don't
not your
bad things
guy.
happen to bad people? Come
I'm not
on,
your guy on
man.
that. I'm not your
What
guy on
about the
that.
good guys always win? Isn't there
Yeah.
some plucky little MMA organization that's not tainted by drugs out there? And
No.
okay, never mind. Yeah,
No.
that's ridiculous. But
The culture, the PED culture in MMA is rampant, and it is unabashed, and until there's year-round, random, unannounced blood and urine testing funded by the UFC, but conducted by an independent organization, or ideally somehow funded and conducted by an independent organization. Yeah, I mean, every time they do a random test, someone gets nailed. Every time they do a random test, an unannounced test in
or
Vegas,
somebody flees the building.
they go scramming. Yeah, they go scramming like a mouse who is in the dark room. You turn the light on and it flies to the nearest hole it can
Don't you
find.
think that's kind of funny though? It's like, haven't they noticed that fighters are getting popped when they come to visit Nevada, especially fighters that are notorious for having used steroids or
Yeah.
suspected? Alistair Overeem had a huge target, pop, they got him. Wanderlei Silva is somebody who fans have talked openly. I mean, Pride was dirty. Dana White's talked about how there was no drug testing in Pride. I mean, Wanderlei Silva's physique underwent pretty clear changes during the Pride years. I would not. I have no evidence that Wanderlei Silva ever used performance-enhancing drugs, but I would bet you he did, and I would be not surprised at all. I mean, he ran away from a drug test, and I don't think it was the language barrier he was worried about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, doesn't it, like, when are these guys going to click to this, that if you're coming to Vegas, leave your roids at home?
Yeah. Well, they're doing them because it helps them win fights. So, do you want to lose? No. So you do your
Yeah.
roids, and you hope that you get off them in just enough time to pass the test come fight night. And that's why random testing is so effective, is because the real gains are in camp anyway. You don't shoot a needle in your arm and walk through
But
the
that's
crowd.
out of competition. That's out of competition. Chael said that wasn't even competition.
Well, out of competition, the things he got popped for are also not allowed,
Yes.
as well as in competition. So if you want to pull your list out and try to razzle dazzle,
He also said they weren't
Chael Sonnen Esquire
performance-enhancing
here.
drugs, which I believe they are performance-enhancing drugs. I think
Yes,
that was a flat-out misleading statement, or
there
a
is.
lie, as some people would say.
There is a substantial testosterone boost factor in one of the things he took. However, the two things he took are most often associated with countering the effects of coming off steroids. I can see the logic, the place from which he came when he said that. However, there is evidence that it also boosts testosterone as well if taken in certain doses over a certain period of time. This
And
is just quite a
have you
game.
ever talked to an endocrinologist about that? I mean, like, if you went to a doctor and
Mhm.
asked him to prescribe you drugs because you're coming off TRT, do you think those are the drugs that would be prescribed by a doctor?
I think so. Yeah,
Really?
I
Okay,
do. Yeah,
I'm interested in that. I'll keep
I don't think
asking until I get the answer I want.
Well, I mean, these guys go to doctors who tell them they have hypogonadism when that's just like it doesn't even mean anything. There's no diagnostic test really. It's just like we don't know why your testosterone's low, so we call it hypogonadism. That's literally what it is. There's more evolved forms, like I believe it's called secondary hypogonadism, that's a bit more clinical, I think, in terms of diagnosis and reason. But if you're not talking about some kind of
Like if
dramatic
your
injury,
testes are missing, that
yes,
if you had testicle cancer, say testicular
exactly.
cancer, things like that. But yeah, I mean, that was the value of the ESPN piece, though. That got TRT kicked out of the sport,
Oh,
and
no
in
question.
short order. In
Yeah, it was
short,
pretty remarkable, the timelines, the way they lined up. I never understand that in like media culture and in like public life, how people when they make a decision clearly based on the publicization of a certain issue, the publicizing, pardon me, of a certain issue. They just deny that it has anything to do with that media article. Like, what are you losing? What are you losing, in terms of ego, if you just acknowledge that, it came out, the way people responded to it had us concerned, so we banned TRT. I mean, everyone runs around and says that has nothing to do with it. It's classic in politics. Someone steps down amid scandal and they deny that it had anything to do with that. And, look, I have evidence 6 months before the story ever came out that I was thinking about leaving. Yeah, okay, well, we can all
Yeah,
play.
yeah. The NSA, the best the Nevada Commission could come out and say was that as soon as they were getting questions from ESPN, they decided to hold a hearing on the
Yeah.
subject. So they did decide they did schedule the hearing before the show aired. But if you've ever been in an environment where a story is being done about you or your organization, you know when a major media outlet is sniffing around doing a story, because being professional media people, they call and ask questions and they're talking to a lot of people. Word gets around, and generally they call the subject of the investigation to get their side. That's nothing that a real reporter wants more than to get the old Mike Wallace hot seat thing going. Well, any final thoughts? Like, so you don't think Chael has sullied the reputation of the UFC? Will Chael fight again?
Yes, yeah, Chael will absolutely fight again. I think the retirement thing was sort of an idea so that he can do what he needs to do to get his system functioning properly again. And, he wanted to leave the door open and never coming back. So you say you're retired. It's what Nick Diaz did too, basically. You,
Yeah.
you want to leave the door open that maybe, if I give my body enough time to recover from the load it had been on for years in terms of this synthetic thing entering my system and messing with my levels, and I come out feeling okay, and I don't need anything really synthetic or anything banned at the very least to feel able enough to compete. I mean, when Dan Henderson came off it for the Rashad fight and then for the Dan Cormier fight, when Alistair Overeem came in with incredibly low testosterone levels against Antonio Silva, I mean, under 200 milligrams per deciliter. I mean, they should not be fighting. They should not be fight. That the normal range they say is what, 300 to 1200, and if you're closer to 3, you shouldn't be in there fighting for your life. I mean, there is a dramatic effect on your testosterone when you just drop cold, and what your body decides to do after what, 6 months, maybe a year without the stuff, and giving your body a chance to begin regenerating testosterone again naturally and getting it back in that flow. That, I think that's a possibility, that Chael takes the time to do what he has to do without getting slapped on the wrist for it or chased around a press conference for it, and then feels that he can come in with a natural production such that he can be competitive again and squeeze a few more paydays out. Because if there's one thing we know about MMA, no matter how auspicious your exit from the sport, or auspicious your last loss made you seem, when you come back, you're all the bigger. We just talked about Anderson Silva, biggest star he's ever been after losing. And absence makes the heart grow fonder, and that's triply true in mixed martial arts. So, Chael, we look forward to your return.
I second that emotion. I remain a big fan of Chael Sonnen, and for the record, I think steroids should be legal. I don't think that there's health evidence that they do harm. I do have some questions. I think they should be carefully monitored. I don't think people should be fighting with the kind of testosterone levels that, say, Vitor Belfort was popped with or admitted to having. I mean, these outrageously inflated testosterone levels. I don't think that's good for anybody, and it's dangerous for opponents. But I'm not necessarily of the camp that, oh my God, these are super drugs that make super, it's not like you took a pill and became Captain America. I mean, you still have to train. You're stronger. I don't know. It's a tricky issue, but
It's a question of fairness. How hard do these drugs allow you to train versus PEDs aren't about the guy who uses them. They're about the rights of the fighters or athletes who do not want to use them, and whether it completely disqualifies them from being able to be competitive vis-a-vis their counterparts who are willing to bend the rules. I mean, the steroid problem in sports is about the people who don't want to use them. It's not about the people who do, and the degree to which they can be competitive. And honestly, it might sound cheesy, but think of the cascading message it sends down the chain all the way to high school sports. If
sure. But at the
it's
same
abundantly
time,
clear that the top guys use stuff.
yeah, but I go down to the Lazy River Resort here outside Austin, Texas, and every 50-year-old guy there has clearly either had pec implants or he's roiding. The women all have breast implants.
Yeah.
The 19-year-old girls all have breast implants. The 19-year-old boys all look like they're roiding. They've got back knee, huge muscles. It's like it's there. It's in the society. I mean, to me, it's like we lost this fight. Let's draw the line at cyborgs. But
Mhm.
what?
Yeah, that's Yeah, good luck with that position.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. Well, thanks, Jack. I hope we'll have you on again soon. And always tell people where they can find you and check out your words of wisdom.
Yeah, anything I put out is always on my Twitter account, which is at Sherdog Rewind, which is the name of the show that I host. Occasional series on Sherdog, a radio series that I do. We do in-depth interviews with a range of personalities in the sport called The Sit Down. So check that out. Anything I'm up to is always at Sherdog Rewind.
All right. Well, thanks again. That was Jack Encarnacio, and this is at Kid Nate. I'll be off for a couple of weeks, but I'll be right back shortly, early July. I'll be right back in time for UFC 175, so we'll be missing Chael very shortly. Remember to give us a like on YouTube, subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube, follow me at Kid Nate on Twitter, and read all about it at BloodyElbow.com. Thanks, everybody. Adios, MMA aficionados.